Next to the well, under the shade of a dry tree, a figure lay motionless. Luke stepped down, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. As he got closer, he saw it was an Apache woman, tall, powerfully built, one leg twisted at an unnatural angle, dried blood crusted around the leather legging. Her sun-darkened face was smeared with dust, her lips cracked and dry. She was still breathing, faint but steady. In her hands, she clutched a small leather pouch. Holding it so tightly it looked like letting go would mean death. Luke knelt beside her, quickly checking the injury. Not an open fracture, but serious enough to make walking impossible. He glanced around, no sign of anyone else, but there were old hoofprints leading west. "Can you hear me?" he asked softly. Her eyelids fluttered open. Her deep black eyes, filled with suspicion, scanned his face, then stopped at the gun on his hip. Luke paused, then slowly unhooked the canteen from his saddle and brought it to her lips. "Drink." She sipped slowly, never letting go of the pouch. Once she regained a bit of strength, Luke lifted her onto the horse and secured her injured leg with rope. "All right," he muttered, climbing into the saddle. "Let's get you home before the sun cooks us both." They rode away from the abandoned well, red dust rising behind them, carrying with it a secret yet to be told. The horse galloped down the dusty road until the silhouette of the cabin appeared on the hill. Luke pulled the reins, jumped down, and lifted the woman off the saddle. Her body was heavy and solid like a sandbag, yet it trembled slightly from exhaustion. He pushed open the cabin door and laid her on the old bed in the corner. She immediately propped herself up, clutching the leather pouch tightly to her chest, her black eyes full of suspicion. "Easy. I am not here to take that from you," Luke said, his voice low and steady. He rolled up his sleeves, pulled out some bandages, a bottle of strong liquor, and a small knife. "Your leg needs to be splinted, or it is going to get worse." She said nothing. When he leaned down, she gave a faint nod. Luke carefully cut the pant leg open, exposing the break. He poured liquor over it, and blood seeped out. She gritted her teeth through the pain, sweat beading on her forehead, but not a single sound escaped her lips. "Stubborn as a mule," Luke muttered as he placed 2 wooden slats alongside her leg and tied them tightly with rope. When he was done, he set a canteen and a blanket next to her. "Stay here. I will sleep on the porch." She did not answer, only turned her head to watch him as he walked away. Night fell fast. Wind howled through the cracks in the door, carrying the scent of dry grass. Luke lay on a long bench out on the porch, his revolver resting at his side. From inside the cabin, firelight flickered through the gap in the door, casting her shadow long across the wall. She did not sleep. All night, she sat leaning against the wall, one hand gripping the pouch. Every sound outside made her eyes snap open. In the darkness, Luke opened his eyes and stared through the narrow gap. He knew the woman was standing guard not just against whoever was chasing her, but against him too. Around midnight, the wind picked up, cold and sharp. The door creaked. Luke heard her cough softly, then the rustle of the blanket as she pulled it tighter around herself. He closed his eyes again and let out a long breath. "Tomorrow," he thought, "I need to find out what the hell she is carrying in that pouch that she will not let go of." The moon climbed higher. The cabin sank into silence, but in that silence, something had begun to form. Not trust, not yet, but a fragile thread connecting 2 lost souls in the desert night. The sun rose, its light spilling through the cracks in the door. Luke opened his eyes and stepped into the cabin. The woman was still sitting against the wall, but she looked more alert now, her eyes no longer wild with fear. "You are still alive. Good," Luke muttered as he stirred the fire back to life. He tossed in some cornmeal, and the smell of thin porridge began to fill the room. She watched him, her gaze cold but not entirely distant. When the bowl was placed in front of her, she took it and ate slowly. Luke sat at the table, saying nothing, just watching. When she finished, she pushed herself up with her hands, trying to stand. Luke frowned. "Your leg is still broken. You need to rest." She shook her head and gestured for a cane. Luke hesitated, but handed it to her. She hobbled out to the porch, sweat gathering on her temples. "Where are you going?" Luke asked. She pointed toward the small well near the cattle shed. "Then be careful," Luke replied, turning toward the yard. When he returned, he found her sitting by the trough, scooping water to give the horse a drink. Her movements were slow and deliberate. The horse, usually skittish, stood still. That afternoon, she dragged bundles of dry straw into the barn. Luke was surprised she could have chosen to lie down and rest. But she chose to work instead. "You don't have to do that," he said. She looked up, sweat trailing down her cheek, then pointed to the broken fence. Her meaning was clear. It needed fixing. They worked together. Luke hammered in the posts while she held the wire. Her hands were strong and steady, even as she leaned on the cane. When the job was done, Luke dropped to the ground with a deep breath. She brought him the canteen. "Drink," she said, her voice hoarse but firm. Luke took it and drank deeply. He looked at her, his eyes softer than before. "Thank you." That night, Luke no longer slept out on the porch. Instead, he lay on the long bench inside the cabin. She rested on the bed, still clutching the leather pouch, but this time with a blanket pulled up to her chest as if accepting his presence. The fire crackled in the stove, casting both their shadows onto the wall, two very different figures, slowly blending under the same roof. That night, the desert wind howled in gusts, making the cabin door tremble. Luke lay on the long bench, one hand resting lightly on the grip of his revolver. The fire crackled in the stove. Just as he began to drift off, a soft, rustling sound stirred the silence. Luke opened his eyes and glanced through the darkness. The girl was sitting upright, her back to him. Firelight flickered across the room, casting her shadow long and tall on the wall. Slowly, she opened the leather pouch. A faint metallic clink echoed in the room. Luke held his breath. Inside was a silver totem, carved in the shape of a wolf howling at the moon. Beneath it was an old, singed piece of leather map. She touched the totem with trembling fingers, then pressed it gently to her forehead, as if in ritual. "What are you carrying?" Luke's voice broke the silence, low and steady. She flinched and turned to face him. Her dark eyes flashed with caution, but the fear was no longer there. "Proof," she said softly, her voice raspy from a dry throat. "They accused my father of betraying the tribe. They plan to execute him at the next full moon. This totem proves he is innocent. I have to get it back in time." Luke propped himself up on one elbow. "And the men chasing you? They want it. If I die, the truth dies with me." The room fell quiet. Outside, the wind wailed through the night, making the cabin shudder. Luke stood and walked toward her, looking straight into her eyes. "Then you are not going anywhere until you are strong enough to stand. I will not let you die out here in the desert over that pouch." Her eyes blinked once, not from fear, but from surprise. No one had said anything like that to her since the day she was cast out. Luke turned back toward his place, his voice gravelly. "Get some sleep. We still have fence mending to do in the morning." She quietly placed the totem back inside the pouch and pulled the blanket up around her. For the first time, her hand no longer gripped the pouch as if it were her last lifeline. Tonight, in the glow of the dancing fire, the cabin felt warmer, as if a silent pact had just been made between two strangers. "I am truly grateful to have you here." If this story brought back memories, dusty afternoons, the sound of hooves echoing in your heart, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel. So each day, we can sit together once more, and I will share with you another tale from the Wild West. The next day, the sun blazed high in the sky. Luke was stacking lumber in the yard to build new fence posts, while Nieli hobbled along with her cane, dragging bundles of straw back to the barn. She worked in silence, stubbornly refusing to rest. While rummaging through the old storage shed looking for rope, she accidentally dropped a worn handkerchief. The fabric had faded with time, the pattern barely visible. Nieli bent down to pick it up and brushed off the dust. Luke stepped in at that exact moment. His eyes darkened. "Put it down," he said, his voice low like distant thunder. Nieli froze, then slowly placed the handkerchief on the table. "I was just trying to clean it." "Do not touch it," Luke growled. He picked up the cloth and folded it carefully, his eyes distant. The air turned heavy. Nieli pressed her lips together, then walked out into the yard, leaning on her cane, leaving Luke alone. The entire afternoon passed with barely a word between them. Only when the sun dipped below the horizon did Luke light the fire inside the cabin, the scent of smoke spreading through the room. Nieli came in and sat by the hearth, quietly placing a neatly folded blanket on the chair. "That handkerchief," Luke began, his voice slower now. "It belonged to my wife. She died during the epidemic. I kept it to remind myself that I once had a family. Nieli stared into the flames, saying nothing. After a long pause, she finally spoke. I had a family too. They said my father betrayed the tribe and cast me out. If I do not return the totem, he will die for something he did not do. The fire crackled between them. Luke sat beside her and let out a heavy sigh. Maybe I overreacted. Nieli turned to him. Her dark eyes were tired but softer now. The silence stretched. The firelight cast their shadows on the wooden wall. Luke reached out, gently touching the scar on her shoulder. She did not pull away. The distance between them shrank. Their first kiss came not in a rush, but slowly, as if both had waited far too long for a moment like this. When they parted, Luke stood up and tossed another log into the stove. Tomorrow, we finish the fence. I am going to need your help. Nieli nodded. That night, she slept deeply for the first time since arriving at the ranch, and Luke, for the first time, saw the cabin as more than a place of shelter. It was slowly becoming a home. Early the next morning, with dew still clinging to the grass, Luke heard the sound of hooves in the distance. He grabbed his gun and stepped out onto the porch. An Apache warrior rode up tall and lean, his face painted red, his eyes sharp like blades. He pulled his horse to a stop and stared directly at Luke. I am looking for someone, he said, his voice rough. A woman named Nieli. She stole the tribe's totem and fled. If it is not returned, blood will be spilled. Luke tightened his grip on the gun. She is inside. Nieli stepped into the doorway, her legs still braced, but her gaze hard as stone. I did not steal it. The totem was taken by someone else to frame my father. I only took back what was ours. The warrior sneered, eyes full of contempt. That is what every traitor says. Your father has already been condemned. Bringing it back will not save him, only bring more shame to your family. The air grew thick. Luke looked at Nieli, and for the first time, he saw her anger falter just for a moment, replaced by a flicker of fear. When the warrior rode off, vowing to report back to the tribal council, Luke turned inside. He set the gun down on the table and looked at her squarely. Is there anything you have not told me? Nieli froze, her hand instinctively gripping the leather pouch. I have told you the truth. If you do not believe me, I will leave. Leave? Go where? Luke snapped. You can barely walk. Then I will crawl if I have to. She shot back, eyes blazing. In that moment, the cabin seemed to shrink around them. Luke turned away, stepping onto the porch, taking a deep breath to rein in his anger. After a while, he returned, his voice low. Maybe I was wrong. But I know one thing: if you walk out that door now, you will die. Nieli stood still, her chest rising and falling. After a long silence, she sat down in the chair, gripping the pouch as if to steady herself. I do not want you caught up in this, she said softly. Luke sat across from her, eyes never leaving hers. If you go, I go with you. I choose to stand with you, right or wrong. Nieli looked at him, and in her eyes was something more than fear. There was a glimmer of trust. That night, they reinforced the windows and prepared the ammunition, as if bracing for a storm. But this storm was not only coming from outside, it was rising from deep within their hearts. 3 days later, Nieli's leg had started to heal. She still leaned on her cane, but refused to let Luke go alone. We have to bring the totem before the full moon, she said, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains where the tribal council would gather. They prepared at first light, a canteen of water, some dried provisions, and a Winchester fully loaded. Luke strapped the leather pouch securely to the saddle, then turned to Nieli. Let's go. This time, there is no turning back. The road into the mountains was silent, broken only by the sound of hooves and the wind. But less than a mile from the valley, a gunshot rang out. A bullet slammed into the trunk of a tree beside them. Bandits, Luke growled, pulling Nieli off the horse and behind a boulder. 4 masked men charged from behind a patch of cacti. Hand over the pouch, one of them shouted, aiming his gun. Come and take it, Luke replied, his eyes cold. Gunfire erupted. Bullets kicked up clouds of dust. Luke returned fire, dropping one of them, but his shoulder jerked back. He had been grazed, blood soaking through his shirt. Nieli clenched her jaw, grabbed Luke's Winchester. Bracing herself with the cane, she stood tall, the barrel aimed at the leader. Go. If you want to live, she said, her voice hoarse, but ringing like a command. The two remaining men exchanged a look, then dragged their fallen comrade and fled. Nieli dropped to her knees beside Luke and quickly tore fabric to bind the wound. "Can you still stand?" Luke gave a tired smile. "I promise to get you there. I am not dying yet." They pressed on until the firelight of the council circle appeared at the base of the mountain. The tribe stood in a solemn ring, their faces stern. Nieli stepped forward and handed the totem to the elder, recounting the entire truth. The silence was absolute. The elder took the totem, then gave a slow nod. "Your father will be spared. And this man," he said, turning to Luke, "stood with you. From this day forward, he is considered a friend of the tribe." Nieli turned to Luke. In the firelight, her dark eyes shimmered not with fear, for the first time, but with the quiet resolve of peace. They left the valley at dawn. Morning mist blanketed the fields, making the path home feel washed clean after a long night. Luke rode slowly, his wound bandaged, the cloth stained red with blood, but he never uttered a word of pain. Nieli walked beside him, limping slightly but holding her head high. She no longer clutched the leather pouch to her chest. It now hung at her side, tied to her belt, as if the burden had become a part of who she was. When the outline of the cabin appeared on the hill, Luke let out a quiet breath. "We are home." Nieli paused, looking at the weathered frame. "Home?" Luke nodded. "If you want it to be." She did not answer. Instead, she stepped into the yard, removed the brace from her leg, and began picking up the boards that had fallen during the last storm. Luke watched her, a faint smile playing on his lips. In the days that followed, they worked side by side as if nothing had ever happened. Luke drove new fence posts. Nieli led the horses back, repaired the water trough. Each evening, they stopped work at the same time, sitting on the steps, sharing a drink of water silent, but no longer strangers. One evening, Luke hung the Winchester on the wall, as if drawing a line under the days of waiting for danger. Nieli sat near the fire, her dark hair down, her gaze softer than ever before. "I used to think I had nowhere to go back to," she said gently. "But this place, it no longer feels temporary." Luke sat beside her, his calloused hand resting over hers. "If you stay, we start over. Together." Nieli nodded, a rare smile passing across her lips. Spring arrived. The grasslands turned green again, stretching wide and alive. A new garden was planted. The cattle grew fat once more. The cabin was now filled with the sound of hammering wood, the splash of water pails, and even the occasional laughter carried on the breeze. One golden evening, as the sun set low, Luke stood on the porch, arms folded. Nieli stepped out and leaned against his shoulder. Together, they looked out over the horizon where the sun dipped behind the hills. "We managed to keep what mattered most," Luke said softly. Nieli smiled. "Freedom and a home." The last light faded from the sky, but inside the cabin, the fire still burned like the heartbeat of a new beginning. "My friends, love is not made of beautiful promises, but of hands willing to bandage each other's wounds. True sincerity does not need many words. It simply stands beside you when the whole world turns away." That is how two souls turned an old wooden cabin into a home, and how barren days became a life worth living. It has been an honor to share this journey with you, dear audience of Wild West storytelling. I truly hope life brings you happiness and peace. I love you all. Let me know what you thought of this story. Leave a comment down below. Press 1 if you enjoyed it. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic tales from the Wild West.